ready to go?
I am ready to go.
All right, here we go. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the MT4MH Studios, where we spread our love and we share our ketogenic lifestyles. This is the Find Your Keto Show, and I'm your host, Stephen T., ready to guide you on your low-carb journey. Today, we have another exciting guest, someone who has dedicated his life to understanding and optimizing health. You may know him as the host of Boundless Body Radio, which is a podcast that has featured some of the biggest names in the low-carb and metabolic health space. Casey Ruff has spent over 16 years as a personal trainer, lifestyle coach, and metabolic specialist. He has helped countless people navigate their health journeys, specializing in low-carb, ketogenic, and carnivore diets. But what sparked his journey to metabolic mastery? And what has he learned from interviewing hundreds of experts in the health space? Let's dive into Casey's journey, from his upbringing in Utah to the insights he's gained through his work. Casey, how are you today?
Oh man, I'm doing well, Stephen. It's such an honor to be hosted on your show. Thank you for the invite. And I had a great time hosting you on our show as well last week. We had a really good conversation. So I'm looking forward to this today.
It's funny hearing you say that it's an honor, because the honor is truly mine. I've told you that you're one of my idols, not just in the podcast space, but just in life. You're one of my idols, and it's a real privilege and an honor to have you on my show today. So thank you for joining me.
Well, thank you very much for the kind words. That really means a lot. I think your standards are set way too low if, if you hold me in that regard. But I think that will become apparent to the watcher after this. But yeah, thank you for the kind words.
So how's your wife, Bethany, and the dogs? How are they doing?
Yeah. They're doing well. Bethany, since we started our business in 2020, Bethany works out of our home here in South Jordan, Utah. We're just on the outskirts of Salt Lake City. We converted our basement into a space. And so she's busy she does tissue work with people, a system that's quite similar to Rolfing, if you've ever heard of that, where you apply pressure while people do different stretches. And she also does Pilates and that kind of thing. So she's very busy during the day while I'm out, training my clients either at a gym facility or, working with my people one-on-one. But yeah, she's busy. The fur babies are good, getting a little older, so we're trying to appreciate the days that we have with them. And everybody's doing well.
All right, that's great to hear. So today I'm not feeling my absolute best, but I'm not terrible either. There's a cold in the house. Samantha was sick on Friday through Sunday. Her fever peaked at like 103 on Friday.
Oh, wow.
She went back to school yesterday, which was Monday, but she's home again today with a fever, and it seems like she probably has strep again, and my wife is sick. They're actually at the doctor now getting tested for it. I have a slight headache. I feel a little bit tired in my eyes, and my blood tests were a little bit off today too. So my sugar was way higher than it should have been for the food I've been eating the last couple of days. And I've seen this before, that when my sugar is high, my ketones are low for no other reason. It's my body's fighting something. But that's really all I'm dealing with. It's not enough to alter my schedule. And since dedicating myself to a ketogenic diet, I don't get sick as often, or if I do, I'm just dealing with a minor nuisance, like, little symptoms. I was just wondering, is this true for yourself and others that you have coached to change their diet?
Yes, absolutely. It's wonderful that you mentioned that and brought that up. I have definitely seen that during the 2020 pandemic, the weekend that everything shut down. I was actually at Low Carb Denver 2020 in the middle of March. It was really weird because Denver was like really emptying out. The conference was emptying out, and even back then we were reviewing papers and studies on ketogenic diets and influenza, which is quite interesting at the time. And most people at that conference were fairly confident that they would be okay during the pandemic. And really, since I went carnivore, I did test positive one time for COVID, but really only needed to kind of like lay down for like a half hour. Was totally fine. I haven't missed a single client hour in 6 years of being carnivore. But you may be able to hear my voice. I think I may have picked something up at the last conference that I was in Las Vegas. I woke up with a pretty sore throat and a little bit of, kind of mucus. My voice is a little bit off. So it's definitely true that the having, the annual colds and flus where you stay home and watch The Price is Right all day, that just doesn't really seem to happen. I always got sick at least once a year. And I can't remember the last time I was sick enough to like actually like miss work and lay around all day. So, I might be just a bit under the weather like you, but yeah, you just seem to cruise through it so much better when you're eating in a certain way.
Exactly. And it's not life altering. I still got my workout in yesterday. I still got up and I went to the bay and I was taking a barefoot walk, even though it was 24 degrees out. And obviously I'm still here with you. And so like my wife's going to be out of work. My kid's out of school. And you hear a lot of people will say, like, since they changed their diet, like, well, I never get sick or I haven't gotten sick in 5 years. For me, that's not the case. I still do get something here and there. And like you got a little bit something here or there. So it's not like this perfectionist level that we're at, but it's nowhere near what it used to be.
Yeah, that's very well said. I think that's a great way to think about it is like, the carnivore, low carb, ketogenic lifestyle, whichever route you decide to choose, isn't necessarily the cure all for everything, but it sure makes a lot of things better. And including, I would argue, like having a really strong immune system that, yeah, like you said, it's not that you never get sick, but when you do, it's much more mild and easy to recover. And yeah, you can still be active throughout the whole thing. So I think that's a good point.
Yeah, exactly. I've had this happen a bunch of times where there's something in the house. Like Samantha's gotten strep every year she's in school, and then my wife usually gets it too. And for me, it's usually like a little bit of a headache. I feel like I said, I feel a little bit tired, but it's nothing that's going to be life altering. I'm not canceling any appointments or anything.
Oh, that's so much better, dude.
Yeah.
It's so much better.
So
That's good.
I listened to some of your very first show, and that was from April 20th of
Oof,
2021.
poor
It
guy.
you had a little bit of a worse sound setup back then, so you must have upgraded your equipment. I could hear that right away. But it's funny to hear that you guys were nervous because I know that feeling. I still get nervous for every show that I do. And one of the things I like to do is meditate for 10 or 15 minutes to try to quiet my mind beforehand. And I was just curious if you still get nervous or jittery before you start a show.
Easy, yes, easy. Yeah, yeah. When we started, it was October of 2020. Business wasn't that great. We had just opened our business a few months prior, and so I didn't have as many clients, and so I had a little bit more time. And we just did a lot of interviews getting started, and that was in 2020. And we started releasing episodes every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and kind of settled into that kind of cadence. And if you do that cadence before long, you have a lot of episodes. And so we've recorded a bunch, somewhere between 700 and 800 at this point. And yeah, you would think that after doing that many, you wouldn't get nervous before, but I still absolutely get nervous before every interview I do, before every guest. You definitely take it to a next level as far as like preparation for your guests. And I definitely don't prepare to the level that you do. But I do like to prepare. I like to hear, several, conversations that the person's done. We interviewed Dr. Sean Baker, I believe it was episode 20. And I got off the phone with him and got off the recording and realized that I had created the same episode that he had already done, several times, 100 times before that. There was nothing new or unique about what we captured with him. And so I always try to do my very best to like capture a different angle or tell a different story or go, a little bit deeper. Again, not to the same extent that you do, but yeah. And I still get nervous every single time before every episode.
And does it matter for you if it's one of your shows where you're doing the interviewing or you're like today where you're being interviewed? Like, does the nervousness different for you?
That's a really good question. I actually find it more relaxing to be interviewed because all I'm doing is answering genuine questions versus trying to come up with stuff. The thing I get nervous about is I feel like I'm going to run out of things to talk about or ask somebody, which is ridiculous because you're just having a conversation. Every conversation I've ever had is flowy and natural and whatever. But for some reason, I always think I'm going to like run out of things to ask about, and that has happened 0 times. So I don't know exactly why I get so nervous before every episode, but I definitely do.
That's funny. And you talk about my preparation behind the scenes, and I have a script that I put together. And for every single one of my shows, I have not gotten to all my questions. There's just not enough time in the day, really. And then we have back and forth like this. And I've noticed for me is that my nervousness or my jitters is the same but different. When I was on your show last week, here I am. You're my idol, and this is a huge opportunity for me. And I'm presenting myself, and so I'm nervous, but in a different way. I'm much more nervous when I'm interviewing someone because I feel like this is my show. I'm running the whole thing. I got to be conscious of the recording, which I've had issues with software in the past. I'm on a couple of different platforms, like all the different problems that I've had. When I interviewed Vinny Tortorich, instead of using this expensive mic in front of my face, I was somehow using the mic that's on my camera. So to me, it sounds god awful. It's garbage. Nobody notices, but to me, I'm like mortified by those kind of things. You know?
It's a good point. You are considering a lot when you're doing these interviews. It was a lot more involved than I had thought that it would be. And you're budgeting your time and trying to get to all the topics. You're trying to be as mindful as possible of, your guest and highlighting the things that they are promoting and the things they want to talk about in their programs or whatever. And so, yeah, there's a lot to kind of think about when you're doing an interview. Generally speaking, the time flies right by. And you and I did the same thing when I interviewed you. We talked about all the things we were going to talk about and probably talked about a quarter of them. And I at the very end, I asked you to come back on for another episode at some point. So that's the good thing when you can't cover all the material, you at least build rapport with somebody like yourself who is an amazing guest, and we can have a second or third conversation in the future. So that's the nice thing.
Oh yeah, when you started wrapping up on the show, I was like, "Are you got to be kidding me? We're done already?" Like I wasn't. I was just
Crazy.
getting warmed up.
It's crazy. It really does fly. Yeah, totally.
I noticed for me, my nerves are high when I'm interviewing somebody like yourself that I've known for a while or I really look up to. I interviewed Georgia Ede recently. That show's coming out soon, and so that one I was like, my heart was pumping when we started. It took me a while to settle in. My very first guest was Brett Lloyd, the Thankful Carnivore, who is somebody I had idolized, and I heard him tell his story 1,000 times. And then as he's telling it on my show to me, I'm literally in tears because he's talking to me now. And I've heard his story so many times. So my heart was pumping for that show too in the beginning of that one. And it was today too. I went and I tried to meditate and it wasn't working. I tried to quiet my mind for like 10 minutes before we got on, but I'm like, Casey, you're off. Casey, you're off.
Jeez.
That's what's happening.
Man, like I said before, I'm nowhere in that's near the same category as some of the guests that you mentioned earlier. And it's funny you brought that up. This is another really good example. Just 2 days ago, I was at the Collaborative Science Conference in Las Vegas, hosted by Dave Feldman, and I had just hosted somebody who's just starting a carnivore diet. She's just starting her journey on carnivore, and one of her amazing influences in her life and her family's life has been Dr. Ken Berry. And Dr. Ken Berry was at this conference, and so I went up to him and said, "Hey, man, do you have like 30 seconds? I would just love to record a quick video to share with this family. I think it'd be quite meaningful to them." And even just approaching him and holding up the camera, like my hand was shaking just a little bit because I was so nervous. I've met him several times, and he's just a very kind and wonderful human. And even just recording that was a little bit nerve wracking.
It's good to see that it happens to the best of us.
Absolutely.
You mentioned Ken Berry. He recently has seen a couple of my tweets and liked them. I'm not even sure how he's seeing me, but I'm like, oh, I got liked by Ken Berry. In the beginning, I was interacting with Chris Palmer, and when he liked me, and then he was responding to my comments, I was like a little schoolgirl, like running around the house screaming, I'm talking to Chris Palmer. And then it was all the big ones along the way, Georgia Ede, and now I Ken Berry. I spoke to Ken Berry in the fall and I asked him to come on, but he was booked and I'm too small and everything. So once I grow, maybe I'll have him on. But so I had interacted with him, but he doesn't know who I am. All of a sudden he's liking my tweets.
That's so cool. I
It's
love it.
awesome.
Yeah. These people, they're doctors and they're psychiatrists and they're researchers, or people like Dave Feldman are software engineers. And I think sometimes they don't realize that we have all their posters on our walls and all the bobblehead dolls and like all their playing cards. And like we get completely starstruck when we see them because to us, they are our heroes and they're doing such amazing work and healing so many people out there. But yeah, I think for them, they maybe don't appreciate how much of an impact they make to the rest of us.
No, absolutely. And every single one that I've interacted with has been like an amazing experience. When I talked to Vinny Tortorich at the Metabolic Revolution rally, it was like I had been talking to a longtime friend. It's much like the way I feel talking to you and when I interviewed Georgia, and I'm talking to Vinny and I can tell that he's genuinely interested in my story. And when I'm telling him what I went through for 30 years, I can see when he says to me, "Wow, I'm really sorry to hear that you went through that." Like I can tell that he's feeling what I'm feeling. And then when I say to him, "So how big do I have to be for you to come on my show?" He's like, "No, I'll come on right now. I will come on tomorrow." I was like, I'm like, he's just shitting me, right? But no, I mean, we hooked up and he emailed me right back. We made the appointment. And it's the same thing with Georgia. When I was talking to her at the rally, we kept getting interrupted and she was genuinely interested in me and my story. And I could see the look on her face and she was so nice and sweet about it. And we kept getting interrupted. And she gave me her email and she said, "Send me your YouTube, send me a little bit about yourself." And in that email was when I asked her to be on the show. And I didn't even expect to hear back because in my mind, I'm just thinking celebrity, big, important, busy person that's not going to have time. She got back to me pretty quickly and booked on the show. And then of course she was a guest. And when I interviewed her, I mentioned about her being a celebrity a couple of times and she blushed and you could tell that she's just down to earth, regular person, just like you and I are, just like everybody else.
Yeah, I have to agree with you and just say that like of all these people, that I've interacted with, at least, digitally, virtually through the podcast, or now having gone to, 2 or 3 conferences a year for the last few years, you get to meet these people. I've met a lot of them in person and they are just as wonderful and kind and caring and, curious as they make themselves out to be. Georgia Ede, for example, I met her in person at the Symposium for Metabolic Health in 2024 in San Diego, and the line for her to sign books was so long because she was spending like 10 minutes with every person and having like very genuine conversations, and the conversations were with again, like other authors, people that we also respect, and also just everyday people who are on their journeys, who are just learning about this stuff, and their lives have been changed. And she does not discriminate between the two. She spends just as much time with anybody, and I have found that largely to be pretty much true across the board in this field. I think when you get so many people ketogenic and their energy is through the roof, and they found this amazing kind of unconventional way of living, and they're so happy, you get so much kindness and passion and care, even with the people that we all look up to.
Yeah, absolutely. That was well said. So I have a question about the title of your show. It's Boundless Body Radio, and I'm curious why you have the word radio in there.
I don't think I've ever been asked that question. I have no idea. I cannot remember how I came up with the title radio versus podcast. It's yeah, great question. I don't think I have a good answer for you. When we were thinking up, what we were going to do with our careers, because we were, put on unemployment during the pandemic. A company that I'd worked with for 13 years, my wife had worked for the same company for a good 6-7 years, put us on unemployment. We soon realized we were going to have to like refigure out what we were going to do. And so we decided to start a business. Bethany came up with the name Boundless Body, which I immediately fell in love with. We made a logo relatively quickly, which I also fell in love with. And so, yeah, I kind of always thought I wanted to do some type of a podcast, even though I had a bit of like imposter syndrome, if you will. But I don't know why radio made it onto the title. I don't know if I must have stolen it from somebody, but I don't know who. So yeah, it's a good question. I don't have a good answer for you.
That is great. The reason I asked is because for me, I've listened to just a ton of talk radio in my life, mostly sports talk, but um, commuting to the office when Howard Stern was on, I listened to him every day, just a ton of talk radio. And they always have a name for the studio they're in. And a lot of times in my mind, when I'm doing the intro or I'm interviewing somebody, I am pretending that I'm a radio DJ. And that's why I call it the MT4MH Studios.
Love it. I love it. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I think it's cool that you call it a studio, and kind of think of it in that way. So yeah, I wish I had a better answer for you. Like I said, I have no idea why I call it radio, but yeah, we just did and started going, and that's kind of how it stuck.
The answer is the answer. But part of the reason I refer to it as a studio is because, we've talked off camera and people have seen some of my videos where I have my dining room behind me. I'm in a small house and this is my workspace for my day job. And I put the backdrop behind me. I have these red lights and lighting in front of me. So in the beginning, I was on the other side of the room and I had umbrella lights like you'd have in a photo studio. And I would literally spend like 45 minutes setting up the studio to record. I've streamlined it now. It's mostly just the backdrop and everything else. I don't have those umbrella lights anymore, but I'm literally transforming my dining room from my workspace, from my office into my studio for the show.
That's funny. You and I both have that in common. I think we talked about it the first time we chatted, where we haven't used our dining room table for dining in 5 years since the pandemic. It's where my laptop normally sits, and I do all my admin work and the editing for the podcast and all our accounting and all that other stuff. Where we, do our program design is from the dining room. And yeah, when we and this may be carrying on to today. When we first started on the podcast, our bandwidth to record was pretty poor, and since we started, we now do video. But before, we didn't have the bandwidth to do video. It was just audio. And so the best audio, as a lot of people know, is when you're in front of like soft kind of surfaces, so it kills the kind of echo. And so I started sitting on the floor like I am today in a carpeted room, and I'm looking literally at all my cycling clothes, and that's where I decided to record the video, because it had the best audio. And to this day, I record in the same place in the second bedroom in front of all my cycling clothes.
That's great. Yeah. I went through a lot of equipment in the beginning. And once I discovered we have the same microphone, the pod mic and the Rodecaster, once I got the appropriate equipment, the sound I didn't feel was an issue. It was my lighting I dealt with, because I was on this side of the room and I have 2 windows here. And so with the windows coming in, I thought it would be great light, but it never looked good. So I have Venetian blinds, then I have room darkening curtains cover them too. I have to make the room as black as possible. And then I have PC lights on each one of my monitors in front of me, and they're adjustable. I can adjust the tint and the brightness and everything. But it took me a long time to get there. I tried a lot of different combinations of stuff to get that. Wherever you're at, like you have windows in front of you right now.
I've got one window in front of me and then two ring lights on
I
either
was gonna
side.
say, I was gonna ask if you had lights because it looks perfect.
Oh,
It looks
good.
like it looks like a sunny day in your room right now.
Good. Yeah, that's kind of what you're looking for. I like kind of the warmer, like reddish lights. I think it looks the best. And yeah, I mean, I've always been told like a good content is the forgiver of a lot of sins as far as video and audio goes. If you listen to really amazing, well produced top podcasts, they have Zoom pings, like they have issues just like everybody else. Like things happen, and our guests have various levels of audio. You told me offline that you recorded something with a microphone that you didn't think you were recording on, and it sounded terrible. But like those things happen. If your content's really good, people will still listen and it's fine. But that doesn't also mean that you shouldn't always be pushing yourself, striving to have better better video, better audio. Our YouTube channel is a great example of that, dude. Like I just have to say, like I said before, our podcast started as audio only, and that was my priority. But as we got more bandwidth, I decided to start putting videos on YouTube. And it's been 3 years now that I've done daily video on YouTube, whether it's a full podcast interview or a clip, like a 10 to 15 minute clip from an interview. We have content that drops every single day on YouTube, but I do very minimal editing for YouTube. And I see people who get in the space and are really good at editing and know how to have like the right title with the SEO and all that stuff. You do a tremendous job on your channel with really great titles and all that stuff. And it takes a lot of time and work to do that. And, for 3 years posting all those videos, we have barely like 2,500 subscribers. So we don't have like massive amounts of subscribers where I can see that if you put the time and energy and work into it and really, care about your setup and your studio, and you don't need it, but you should always be working on improving it where you can. It definitely makes a difference and can get your message out to more people, which is what you want. So
Yeah, I think it makes a huge difference, but it's just kind of my personality too, is to try to strive for perfection, even though I know I'm not going to get there. But I've also been a huge audiophile my whole life, so I'm into technology, I'm into speakers and setup. And when I first started trying out mixers, I was perplexed. I couldn't figure out like certain mixers how they hook up and how does the mic hook to that. And I was trying everything USB, and it was like there were products that I bought that I couldn't even figure out how to use. Now I'm the type of guy where you give me any electronic, I don't need to read the book. I'm going to be able to figure it out by plugging it in and playing with the buttons or whatever. But some of these mixers I couldn't do it with, so it became a huge challenge for me. I was also trying to do it on a budget because we don't have a lot of money here. And I'm still mowing lawns in the summer to make ends meet. I'm hoping to end that. I actually just started coaching people on a professional level and getting paid for it. So I think that's going to supplement the lawn mowing probably, I hope. But I didn't want to spend the amount of money it cost on the Roadcaster when I saw mixers on Amazon for like $50. And I tried the 50 and the 80 and the $100, and I either couldn't figure them out or they were just terrible, or they had like tinny sound. I had like a $20 mic versus I think this was $100 for this mic. I had to break down and put the money into it to make it work.
yeah, that's such a good point and something I relate to 100%. I remember the first mixer that I bought. It was the same kind of thing. I think it was like a $50 used mixer that I could not for the life of me figure out. And yeah, podcasting, you can do it for free. Like seriously, you can record a Zoom video, you can get an account on Zoom, that's free. Record on your phone. Most people already have the phone. Even just wired headphones for audio are passable. Like that is fine. You can start with that, but the quality does make a difference. And I remember buying that mixer, being completely confused by it, returning it, and ended up investing in the Roadcaster, which is a great example. Like that's a $650 podcast mixer. Again, we had just started the business. I didn't have a lot of cash for something like that, but investing in that made podcasting so easy that I can put the micro SD chip in. I push record. I don't need to be on my computer. I can be on my phone. All the dials are there. It's already optimized for the sound. And yeah, you and I have the same microphone, which again, I just push one button. It's this microphone. It knows exactly what it is. This is funny, but I also with a Roadcaster, if people are not familiar, there's normally like a sound bar on the side where you can have like different sound effects. So people can add like the but ching or different like applause or whatever. I have my intro music on my podcaster, and so when I'm recording a show, my music is playing live, which I think is kind of cool. And I fade it down myself every time. It feels really analog, but it also means that anything I goof up in the introduction or in the kind of outro when the music is playing, I can't go back and edit later. I'm kind of locked in because the music track is recording at the same time. But that tool literally enabled me to push record and start the podcast itself. And so if it's important to you, invest the money. If you don't have the money, there are tons of free resources out there, but it does make a difference.
My first couple of shows, I was doing the same thing with your music, but I didn't know how to do it. I don't know if I can do that on my mixer. I had my phone, my iPhone with a special wire that I had to pay like $30 for the wire to hook it up. And I would play the music on my phone on a track and then I would fade it out. I did that like my first show or two, but then I realized in the editing, I can take the track of the song and put it in the editing as the intro. So I don't have to do that, which it's made it a lot easier for me because that's like an extra thing I don't want to have to fumble and mess around with.
Yeah, good call. I did a whole separate podcast that was all about podcasting. And one of my favorite things to do was to talk to other podcasters and get to know their process. How are you doing things? How are you doing your editing? How are you doing your video? And it was cool to see all the many, many different ways that somebody could do it out there. And there are lots of different ways. And so anybody who's out there thinking about content creation, especially in this space, I think it's quite a unique kind of area that we're in, with keto, carnivore, this kind of space where people find this stuff and they just don't want to shut up about it. They want to talk about it. They want to share their message. They want to do some type of content creation. But there's so many different ways that you can do that. And again, use what you have in the very beginning, use the resources you already have, but it is worth the investment down the road to like try to make the video or the audio better.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can find now that there are YouTube channels dedicated to how to have a successful YouTube. There are podcasts dedicated to how to have a successful podcast. That's one of the things I've gotten into now since the summer, that I've been more dedicated to my diet and I'm doing really well. Like, not that I'm not as interested in listening to the Metabolic podcast, but there's not as much for me to gain as there was when I was trying to figure my stuff out. So I've moved on to another passion. That's what I do. I like to listen to how people put their workflow together for their YouTube videos and stuff like that. You mentioned the SEO and the titles, and that's where I learned how to do a lot of that stuff. I didn't know anything about that in the beginning, but there's a whole world dedicated to this stuff on how to be a podcaster, how to be a YouTube creator.
Yep. No, I love that. It's 2025, man. There's no barriers stopping people from doing that kind of thing. And it comes down to even things like cooking, like learning how to cook. Like if it's important to you, like if you really want to learn it, it is a skill. Like you could pull up a bunch of YouTube videos and learn how to chop things and learn how to saute things, and like you can learn. Like it is a skill, and once you know it, you'll be able to use it for the rest of your life. And so podcasting is exactly the same way. Developing and building your social media is the same way. So yeah, if you want people to hear your message, it is important.
One of the things I wanted to mention is that the reason that I have idolized you is because not just because I've listened to you for so many years. I've probably been listening to you since the beginning. But if I am preparing for my own interview and my guest has been on your show and I only have time to listen to one show, yours is the one I'm listening to.
Oh, wow.
The one that sticks out is Hannah Warren. I interviewed her in the fall, and she is the outreach coordinator for Metabolic Mind. So she is huge. She's very important. She's also a vegetarian doing keto, in remission from her diagnosis of bipolar 1. And people who know me and my channel, most of my guests are carnivores because that's what I do and that's who I interact with, but it's also pretty popular. So that she was a very important guest. And I listened to your show with her to prep. And as I'm listening to it, I'm like, this guy's asking everything that I want to ask. How am I gonna? I don't know how I'm gonna do any better than this. My show ended up being a lot like yours, but I think it's interesting how you discovered me. And I was wondering if you could tell that story. How did you find me?
It's hard to remember. Didn't I find you through Dave Mack?
It may have been, but it was your preparation for another guest that you had on recently.
Oh, who was the other guest? You're going to have to remind me.
It was Mia Mendez.
Mia Mendez. Yes. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Funny story. Thank you for reminding me. Sometimes like I get, with 3 a week, I get confused about how I find people. I'm always trying to look for new people, but yeah, Mia Mendez was one of the recipients of the Fresh Start Award for Metabolic Mind in 2024. And when I saw the list of people that had received that award, I just wanted to reach out to each one of them. And now I do remember it was through finding her. I saw her interview on your show, which you did a very, very good job of. And she kind of shared something that you shared with me also in the episode that we did, that like we kind of have this notion that people like yourself that find ketogenic diets, and reverse amazing, complications of mental health issues. Once you find that, and a lot of people eventually kind of get to the carnivore space for the same kind of reason. We just think that like you're done, like you figured it out and you're there. Yeah, the journey's over. I believe you called it keto heaven. I'm in keto heaven. I can just live in keto heaven now. And
Yeah.
getting to know Mia's story and also getting to know your story was kind of eye-opening in the sense of like, oh, this isn't done. This is not just because they found this thing doesn't mean that donuts are not still really good and pasta is still really good. And like, it's still a challenge. It's still not that easy. And I got to appreciate that with her, and learning about you and your story, how you had to do that as well, helps me understand like, oh, it is still tough. It's not just like, this is the way. And it's just so easy for me to do this for the rest of my life. And, I think it's important both of you and people in the space be really honest and open about that. She was like that, and so were you. So I really do appreciate that.
Oh, thank you. And I thank you for the compliments. I just found it really interesting that I've sought your show to prep for my guest, and here you are prepping for a guest, and somehow you find my show. I'm like, this is like a dream come true, Just hearing that story was amazing. It was really amazing. But
Um,
yeah, Mia and I have become really close friends, and she's got a meetup group that she runs, and she's made me her co-host, and we're working together. And she started a fundraiser for me recently. This was done for her by Dr. Ian Campbell. He started a fundraiser for her a couple years ago so that she could afford to take Dr. Georgia Eads' course so that she could get trained in how to treat people with the ketogenic diet. So Mia did the same thing for me on my birthday. And we already reached the goal. I've already registered for the course. I'm going to be taking George's course. And Mia has been a huge supporter of mine. Next month in March, I don't have the date in front of me, but I'll put it in the show notes maybe. We're going to have Hannah Warren on as a guest speaker on our meetup group.
Amazing. Yeah,
Yeah.
amazing. She was one of the people that was also at the conference I was at this weekend. So getting to see her again, she's just absolutely lovely, and what an amazing journey she's been on. And I think it is so cool that, yeah, you can do this many multiple different ways. So I love your channel and what you promote is like Find Your Keto. Like there's different ways of doing this. And Hannah's definitely a really good example of that. Yep, exactly. Exactly. Find Your Keto it's a great name of the channel because other people can do it differently. And with Hannah, like she literally just has an aversion to meat. It's not that she doesn't want to eat meat. She does, and she can't. She's got an aversion to it. And so she recognizes that and understands that. And it's funny when she's at a low carbohydrate conference, like to be at a nutrition conference and feel weird about saying that you're eating vegetables is quite a funny thing. And it's kind of like that. But yeah, she's managing very, very well. She's very healthy and happy, and she's a wonderful person. So everybody listening to that episode will get a lot out of that, not just the guest, but also the wonderful host. So looking forward to that.
Thanks. And here we're 35 minutes in already. We haven't even really started the show. This is what I like about doing a longer show than most people do, because we just spent a half hour just kind of BSing here, and it's been great so far.
I think it's fun. I think it helps people get to know kind of the behind the scenes, the processes. I always take these episodes that we record. So this is going on to YouTube primarily. It's not being released as an audio episode at all, is it?
It
Like in
will
pod?
eventually. That's one of those things that's on my to-do list. So some of my shows in the beginning, I also was putting them as a podcast, but I don't have a lot of time. I haven't done it with all of them. So everything comes on YouTube, and then eventually they'll all be pod. There's no demand for it. I don't have people asking me to do it. Otherwise I would.
Yeah, gotcha. Yeah, well,
But I want that.
as we started primarily audio and then got into video, ours was a little bit the opposite. But even if it would, we still take these episodes and I release them as bonus episodes on my podcast as well, and add just a little bumper to kind of preview things. And I think it helps people get to know, the host of the show, and regardless of whether people listen or not, I don't really care. But I think it does add insight. So I appreciate the chat.
Well, I appreciate it, and I thank you for initially. I said, but I want to do 2 hours. You're like, well, it's not going to be for a couple. I'm like, I don't care if you can give me 2 hours. We'll make it work for you. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I'm looking forward to it.
All right, so let's get into your story here. You grew up in Utah, and I ask all my guests. I want to know what your childhood was like, but I also want to know what your diet was like growing up.
Yeah, gotcha. So yeah, as you said, I grew up in Utah. I was not born here, but essentially my parents moved back to Utah. They were both from Utah originally. They moved back in 1985. My dad was in journalism, is in journalism, and had to get experience in a small market. So I was born in Bismarck, North Dakota. He eventually got a job here in Salt Lake City, where he's been doing sports anchoring, sports reporting for the last 40 years for the same station. And so we moved back to the Salt Lake area. So basically, like born and raised. I was born into the Mormon religion, and so that was a big part of my life for the first half of my life. As most people know, most Mormon kids are shipped off for 2 years to do a kind of evangelical mission. So I lived in Brazil for 2 years and spent some time down there. But anyway, yeah, we were raised just the way everybody else was at that time. Mormons, unlike religions like the Seventh Day Adventist Church, are not taught to eschew meat. Meat was always on the table, but there is kind of a nutritional kind of code that a lot of Mormons live up to. Most people know that Mormons don't drink, they don't smoke, they don't drink coffee or black tea even. That's all part of a series of scriptures that kind of talk about that and recommend lots of fruits and vegetables. But we lived on a kind of lower fat mixed diet growing up. There was a lot of cereal. My mom was a stay-at-home mom, and she was always like making us dinners, and so it would be a lot of things from scratch at the very least. And she would at least cook for us, which was nice. But yeah, it was the same kind of stuff that was promoted. She was diagnosed with cancer back in, what would that have been? Probably December of 1997 or 1998. And I remember at the time we just doubled down a little bit more on the standard nutritional advice. More skim milk, more low-fat stuff. Red vines were always in the house, and I lived on fruit snacks and granola bars, and as long as it was low fat, it was fine. And so, yeah, that's kind of what I was brought up on. Obviously, with my dad being into sports, I was also kind of into sports and wanted to play a little bit of everything. But as a kid, especially around ages 10, 11, 12, I was they were buying me Husky clothes, and I didn't exactly know what that meant. I just knew that wasn't like the best thing, and that's what helped get me into fitness and learning about weight training and doing different activities to, train my body composition, change my body composition. And so, yeah, that's when I learned how to, lift weights, and I invested in a small set of weights in my unfinished basement and used that, and eventually got a job at a gym at age 16. But yeah, it was a pretty standard upbringing on the pretty standard American diet back at the time, which was a lot of low fat, very high carbohydrate for sure.
I think all my guests have given the same answer. Basically, we all grew up on the same diet.
Totally. It's almost like it would be. I'll steal this from one of my podcast guests, Daniel Magyar, when he talked about like a carnivore diet specifically. And he made such a good point when he said, if you don't think the carnivore diet is weird, I think that you're weird. And you think back to like the 80s, 1990s, if you weren't doing low fat, like that's almost like borderline child abuse, unless you had read early copies of the Atkins diet and you were into that, or you were into like really early research on epilepsy or something. Like you were doing what everybody was saying you had to do. So yeah, it doesn't surprise me that a lot of our mutual guests were, kind of in that same boat.
Yeah, exactly. It's just a little different variations on it.
Totally.
So that's great. So you just answered a bunch of my questions all in one shot there. So we know what led you to pursue your personal training. In your early years as a trainer, what were some of the biggest misconceptions you had about health and weight loss?
Oh man, what an awesome question. Yeah, so I got that job at the gym. I eventually went to college to study architecture, which I never graduated in because I had also joined a local kind of big corporation gym here in the Salt Lake Valley, and started working out there in the off season for cycling. And in that process of like working out there, I got to watch some of the personal trainers and see what they were doing, and it looked really interesting. One of the things that they were doing at this gym was they were using heart rate monitors, which I had been quite proficient in since the age of about 18 when I returned a TV VCR combo that my parents gave me to take down to college. I returned it to get a polar heart rate monitor so I could train my heart rate when I was doing cycling way back then. That's how nerdy I was. But anyway, yeah, it just looked like it was a lot of fun to be a trainer. So I ended up getting the certification I needed to get hired by this company. I started there in 2007. Eventually, I got trained in using metabolic carts, which is a way to measure somebody's metabolism, how they're burning calories. Mostly like the number of calories that somebody is burning, we could be able to tell somebody. So if anybody's seen this on like Gatorade commercials or at their local gym or hospital, people wear a mask. It looks like a VO2 max kind of a test, which is something we would measure. And you just kind of ramp people up and see how they're burning their calories and how many calories they're burning. If they're doing different activities, you could do it resting, you could do it exercising. And so early on misconceptions, I definitely was not introduced to any kind of like low carbohydrate diets back in 2007 for sure. That was very, very early. But at the very least, we knew that if you were under eating and or over exercising, you could have an effect on your metabolism where you were suppressing your own metabolic rate. I would say we kind of understood that fairly early on. People that did a lot of calorie restrictive diets would have metabolic rates that would be very low, meaning they are teaching themselves to burn less calories, and thus they would have worse and worse results for what most people were trying to do, which was lose weight, like you mentioned. And so we kind of knew that, and we would set ranges for people that was above whatever we measured their resting metabolic rate as, and say like you need to eat at least this many calories. But to create a deficit, you can still do it by eating less than what you would burn a day. And so, how are you going to do that? And we'd use these like dials of like, you could decrease your food consumption, the calories in part. We could increase the exercise or the calorie burn part, the out of the equation of the calories in, calories out. I would say that's the biggest thing. We could manipulate that and use those numbers, but yeah, in the beginning, it was just that like I would tell somebody what to do and how many calories to eat, and they would just, according to the math, would lose a pound a week, or 2 pounds a week, whatever their target was, and however we manipulate those sliders. And then it was just like you knew that people were not going to do it. They weren't going to see those results. And so you just got used to saying like, oh, well, I told you how many calories to eat and how many, calories to burn during exercise. You're a lazy slob. Like you didn't pull this off. You didn't get it right. You didn't count right. All the things that most people in the industry know. It's not sustainable. It doesn't work for people practically. And that was, I think, one of the biggest misconceptions. There were several, especially when it comes to like methods of training. And we could get into the whole discussion of like the difference between functional, quote unquote, functional training in the gym versus, high intensity training that I use more of now. But anyway, the calories in, calories out thing was kind of the biggest thing in the beginning as it pertained to weight loss, what most people were going to a gym to seek anyway, like you said. So that's probably the biggest one.
Yeah, that's really great. So I'm thinking like, so what they would tell you back then is to eat less, move more. But you're saying that people that are eating much less and moving much more, they're actually slowing down the amount, they're slowing down their metabolism or the amount of calories their body needs, right?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly right. If you're ever curious about why there wasn't like a "Where Are They Now" tour for all the people in the Biggest Loser contest, that's precisely the reason why they did a study on a lot of the former participants of the Biggest Loser contest, and found that after several years of being on the show, they not only gained a great percentage of their weight back, but they also measured what we're talking about, the metabolic rate and how many calories they were burning. And even years later, their metabolic rate was still very, very low, much lower than what it should have been at the time. And that's also a cool example. I did measure somebody who had just been kicked off of the Biggest Loser. She had lost a tremendous amount of weight, had amazing stories, by the way, like the silliest stories of these trainers, like yelling at them. They were working out 6 hours a day. They were eating 1,200 calorie diets. And you would think that this was all like really organized and there was like a staff involved. And like these people were like kind of thrown to the wolves and they had to like figure out how to get their food themselves. And like it wasn't as well organized as people thought. But yeah, anyway, she'd just gotten kicked off. And again, she'd lost all that weight. But where, based on her age, height, weight, and gender, there's a formula you can look up called the Harris-Benedict formula, which gives you a prediction of where that number should be. The predicted value for her and her demographic, I want to say, was right around 2,000 calories, and I measured her at 1,000 calories. So if you think about that, like when you are wanting to burn fat and lose weight, you want to be burning a lot of fat and burning a lot of those calories. And so burning less of those calories really means your body is in this like energy save kind of mode and it's not burning very much, which evolutionarily makes a lot of sense. If you're out running around and not eating very much, what is your body going to do? Is it going to burn through all its calories, or is it going to start to save as many calories as possible and drive you to consume as much food as possible when you get it? And that's what happens. And that's why, we have this idea of like calories in, calories out, and you need a caloric deficit. And we just think about it the wrong way. It's not that we, don't need a caloric deficit to create weight loss. I think you still can, and that's fine. It's just we think of it very simplistically and in a way that's like, we're looking at numbers like it's math without realizing that we are changing the equation all the time based on how our body is responding to what we're doing. And when you get out of that paradigm, you realize like, oh, I can kind of do the opposite and still create like a caloric deficit by burning so many calories all the time, not changing what I'm doing, just teaching the body to burn lots of fat and burn lots of its calories that way. And so, yeah, it's a different way to look at it. I don't fault anybody for getting into that trap of the calories in, calories out thing, but I have found that to be a huge misconception in the industry for sure.
I find it very interesting because there's so many different ways that you can put yourself into a deficit. And I've had stretches of time, like months at a time, where I'm doing rolling 48. So I'm only eating once every 48 hours. And I have the capacity to eat a ton of food in one sitting. So I'm eating like 1.5 days worth of food every other day. So, and I'm tracking my stuff. So on the average for the week, I'm in a deficit, but I'm eating a lot of food every 2 days, and I'm perfectly comfortable on my fasting days as well. And I still do similar kind of things where I cycle my calories every day. Now, my mental health is my priority. That's my number one goal. So I got to stay in a certain depth of ketosis. So I can't eat a ton of protein and eat a ton of calories every day. Like I just weightlifted yesterday. So I'm going to eat more calories and more protein today. I had a small meal yesterday, a big meal today. I'll go back to a small meal tomorrow. But one of the things I find interesting, and I would love to get one of these metabolic tests done on myself, because if I go to the calculators, they're going to tell me that my my maintenance calories are like 22 to 2300, and I'm averaging 38 to 4500 on the week. And I have days like Saturday, I had like 6500 calories. I'll have days like that, and the next day I'm weighing myself every day as another measurement, and I lost a half a pound after eating all that food somehow. And I would love to see what's going on with my metabolism and be able to compare it to other people and how other bodies are functioning.
Yeah, I made it. I'm so glad you brought that up, Stephen. I made it into the low carbohydrate space for several different reasons. There were a lot of different things going on, but one of the primary reasons was as I was doing these metabolic assessments on people and measuring the resting metabolic rate, we started to notice as people were doing, keto was getting a little bit more popular. As somebody was doing a low carbohydrate diet, I would generally observe a boost in their metabolic rate where they were burning more than the average or expected value by several hundred calories when they were eating lots of protein and lots of fat. And another thing that we were able to measure, if you look at the amount of oxygen and carbon dioxide that's coming in and out of the breath, the oxygen you take in and how much of it is converted to carbon dioxide, that tells you about what substrate you're burning. Are you burning fat? Are you burning carbohydrates? What combination of the two of those things are you burning? And people that were going keto were not only boosting their metabolic rate, meaning they were burning more calories naturally, not doing anything differently, just being themselves. And they were burning tremendously high percentages of their calories from fat. It wouldn't be, that weird to see somebody burning nearly 90 to 100% of their calories from fat when they were resting. So these people are just chewing through body fat. And you mentioned fasting, which is the thing that just completely broke my brain. I will give you this example. A guy came in to do this assessment with me, and he was on staff, and I knew him and what he was into, and he was kind of at the time into the same kind of low carbohydrate stuff that I was into, but he was more into the fasting. He'd gotten into the fasting then, and we did his metabolic rate test. I want to say we did it twice because I couldn't believe the values that were coming off of the machine, and it came back that where his expected value for calorie burn was 2000, it came back at like 2600 or 2650 or something. It was like 500 600 calories higher than the normal. And I said, wow, like this is really good. We use this for like the minimum value of the number of calories you should be eating in a particular day. So just make sure you're eating at the very minimum 2600 calories. And his maintenance calories were like up in the 4000 5000. But he had some fat to lose, and I think he was trying to lean out a little bit. And he looked at me like completely exasperated and was like, I can't eat 2600 calories in a day. Like, what do you want me to do? I'm eating, mostly protein, mostly fat. Where do you want me to get these calories from? I could go back to eating, cold cereal and soda if you want. Right. And so it just didn't make sense. How come somebody who deprived their calories, ate less calories, would depress their metabolic rate, but people doing fasting would not only maintain their metabolic rate, but increase it, make their bodies burn even more calories and such a high percentage of their calories from fat? And it was really finding the work of Jason Fung and the Obesity Code that taught me the difference between fasting versus calorie deprivation and what the body does in the fasted state. It's quite remarkable. And you hear stories like that all the time where people are either, living off their own stored fat and they're eating way less than what they think they should because their body's taking the remainder of the calories from stored body fat, or they hear things like you were saying, like some days you're eating 6,000, 7,000 calories. If that was plugged into a formula, that would make no sense at all, that you wouldn't be, exactly weight stable. So fasting is just such a game changer, especially when you pair it with the diet that you and I promote, which is again high protein, high fat. It's just such a game changer as far as the metabolism. You don't see the suppression of the metabolic rate.
So that must play a large role for me because I've been eating one meal a day I've been doing this for years now. And like I said, I did the rolling 48s and I do extended fasting. It's typically one full day a week, not every week, but one day a week. And so most days, if I'm only eating once, it's a 21 to maybe a 26-hour fast every single day. And I'm also getting 90% of my calories from fat on most days. And I wonder what that's doing. I don't know if that's ever been studied before. I know that they do this diet for children with epilepsy, but I don't know if they're studying their metabolic rate or not. It's something I want to look into. Not, do you know anything about that?
That is a really great question. I am not aware of any specific studies that they're doing on that. That would be quite fascinating. I can only comment from anecdotal experience and what I saw using those metabolic carts. That I would be very surprised if those people were not just burning more calories all the time and shifting their metabolic rate more towards the burning of fat. And when we understand that if you have stored fat on your body, even if you're incredibly lean and don't weigh very much, those numbers are like 10,000, 20,000, 50,000, 90,000 calories of fat that somebody has on their body. And if somebody's obese, that number goes well into the hundreds of thousands, 400,000, 500,000, 600,000. And that's calories that your body has stored and can use. It can use them as a fuel source if it wants. It's just that most people never create the conditions to burn off the fat. They're always in a condition where they're storing the fat due to the things that they're eating. And so I'm not aware of any research that's being done on that, but that would be my guess based on everything I've seen. And also, I think we can say that the mechanisms have been so well explained by so many people, including Dr. Jason Fung and his work in intermittent fasting, that we not only see all the anecdotes, but we also have the mechanisms to explain why that might be happening. So that would be my hunch, is that we would see that people on that way of eating would definitely be burning more calories all the time.
And that's what I figure is that's the only way to explain that I can eat such high calories. Like I said, most weeks I'm averaging anywhere from 35 to maybe even 4,500. One of my goals is to lean out, but I'm not doing it for looks. I'm doing it because I have the spare tire, I have the love handles, and this is from years of not having an off switch and eating too much food overall, but also falling off the diet every couple of months or however often. And that's one of my goals. I also want to eliminate all my visceral fat, which means I have to lose weight. I have to get rid of some of the subcutaneous fat as well. But it's tough for me because I don't know what my maintenance calories are right now. I'm trying to figure that out. And I'm a geek. I like that you shared before that you got the heart rate monitor. You traded in the VCR for the heart rate. I love that because I'm a geek like that. I love data. I have my own spreadsheets that I make with formulas built in. So I'm looking at my food as averages over the week, and I'm going to start building them out ahead of time and just trying to reduce my total and my averages for each week and see what happens. I weigh myself every day and just see what happens.
Yeah, it's really hard to kind of express that point to somebody like yourself that really loves the data and you want to track and that you want to have a solid answer and want to know exactly what that is. And unfortunately and frustratingly, it doesn't. It's so tough. Your body just kind of does what it does, and there's so many inputs and outputs. And even what I was doing, like measuring a resting metabolic rate on somebody using a very proven tool, we were doing a 20-minute test and trying to extrapolate it to 24 hours. And you realize, like, this is just 20 minutes on one day, on a Monday morning. I don't know. Is this rate the same on Friday afternoon? Is it the same as you sleep? Is it the same after a certain meal? Like, there's so many different factors. We use all these tools to try to give, the best answers that we can and give ranges. At the end of the day, it's a lot of that self-experimentation, like you said, of like, I'm going to try to play with this. I'm going to see what I can do to lean out. And yeah, it's so frustrating to not be able to tell people like, oh, just do this and have your macros here. It's just, yeah, it just doesn't work like that, and you're just always dealing with such a moving target that it makes it quite frustrating for people like you that they want the answers, want the data, love playing with that stuff. And so on the flip side of that, it is cool that you can experiment with that and just see what works for yourself and try different things. And at the end of the day, that's probably as close as somebody can get to figuring out what is best for them at that time.
It's one of my passions. I love tracking data. I love tracking things over time and seeing trends, and so it fits really well for my lifestyle. And I, I I never thought about the moving target thing because so I know like so say I fast on Sunday and I start out with a huge meal on Saturday. I fast on Sunday. I'm fine all day. I wake up Monday. I'm ready to go. I put in a heavy lift. Now I wake up Tuesday. I know that I'm going to be hungry early in the day on Tuesday, and it always corresponds to my amount of soreness. So heavier workout on Monday. I'm hungrier on Tuesday, and I got to be prepared for that. So I'm probably going to eat two or maybe even three times on Tuesday. And I have often wondered like, is it just because I worked out? But I never really thought about, is it my metabolic rate is changing? Would that somehow correspond to the fact that I exercised the day before and now I'm in recovery mode? Does that affect your metabolism?
I would argue yes, for sure. The process of strength training is a really great example of that. If you do, what we think of as quote unquote like cardiovascular training, which I think it's interesting that we even call cardiovascular training cardio training. The evidence that it's that good for our heart is not as strong as I think we thought. But anyway, when you're doing cardio type training, what you're teaching yourself is efficiency, right? Like if you're doing a lot of running, the more running you do, the better you get at running, and better means more efficient. Like you have a better stride, you can maybe run faster, and the body learns how to not work as hard to be able to do that. So if your goal is to run incredibly far distances, that's really beneficial for you. But again, efficiency means you're not burning very much energy. So that is the antithesis of what most people's goal is, which is to burn fat. Strength training works amazingly because when you do a strength training session, if you do it properly, you're sending a signal to your body that it needs to start to build up muscle and all kinds of lean tissue. So not just muscle, but also make sure the bones are very strong, make sure the connective tissue is very strong. And your body is evolutionarily pretty abhorrent to using energy for that kind of a thing. It doesn't want to use a lot of energy. It's inherently lazy, and wants to stay that way. But when you send a strong signal to your body that says like our strength level is insufficient, we need to get stronger, your body has to then use more energy than it would have to go through that process, and thus the using of that energy means you're burning more calories and more fat all the time. So I would definitely expect like an increase of hunger as a natural signal of your body needing some extra protein, extra nutrients at some point after the workout. It doesn't necessarily mean that people have to be like eating 30 minutes after a workout. I don't think a lot of people want to do that or are naturally hungry after that. But yeah, that could very much explain that, in my opinion, why you're so hungry as your body's going through that recovery process. That would make a lot of sense to me.
Okay, great. Yeah, that's great to hear that. So, I'm one of the types that I typically will eat immediately after, especially on a Monday, because now I fasted Sunday, so I am ready to go. And one of the things I really love is I want to talk about sprinting because it's one of my passions. I've been sprinting on Wednesdays, and I'm always thinking about our ancestors and how they lived. Like we don't have the proof, but we can guess. And I have an imagination. I love to try to imagine the stories. And we wouldn't, if we were traveling from one location to another to get more food or to get safety, we're not going to jog there. We're not going to do a slow, steady state, long distance run. We're going to walk. We're going to conserve our energy. And then if there's a predator coming after us, we're going to sprint, right? We're going to run like hell. Or if there's an opportunity for food, we're going to sprint. We're going to run like hell. So I think sprinting is very appropriate for our bodies. And I imagine if we were going without food for a couple of days and then we found prey, we sprinted after our prey and we killed the animal, we're not going to wait 30 minutes to eat it. We're probably going to eat it right away. So one of the things I discovered was on a day that I sprint, I like to eat immediately. I'm going out on the bike path out front. I come in and I'm eating my food right away. And so I spoke about on your show that I'm eating most of my food raw. So I'll have a bowl of food. It's raw beef fat, raw beef. I'll take it out like 45 minutes to an hour before I sprint. So when I come in, it's already warmed up to room temperature. And there is just this primal satisfaction I get from running my sprints as hard as I can and coming in and eating right away. And I just wonder if I'm emulating what our ancestors used to do. What do you think about that?
I love it. I tend to agree. I can't remember who was the content creator that came up with this, but there's kind of a term I remember learning about called beasting, feasting, and fasting, which is like the signal of hunger is not the signal to eat, it's the signal to hunt. And you're right, there would have been some energy usage when it came to hunting, regardless of whatever type of hunting you were doing. When you got hungry, that would be the motivator to go find some food. I think a lot of people understand once you've gone into a ketogenic diet and you start intermittent fasting, when you get hungry, you get quite sharp. Mentally, emotionally, like people prefer, I think most people naturally get into this. They prefer fasted workouts to fed workouts. So when I play ice hockey once a week, which is my version of sprinting, that's on a Monday. The game is from 11:45 a.m. until 1:15 a.m. So it's an hour and a half, very glycolytic, a lot of sprinting like activity. But anytime, if I ever eat before the game, I feel way more sluggish. And I much prefer to do it in the fasted state. And I feel a lot sharper. And it's like, if you're thinking about that predator that you may have run from, what are you going to be more afraid of, the hungry lion or the fed lion that's taking a nap, in the shade? So I do think that is a natural adaptation. It's cool that you notice that with yourself, is like, that hunger signal may not mean go eat right now. It may mean go do something, use up some energy. You're going to be quite sharp again, mentally, physically. And then after you've, eaten, eat a lot, get really satiated, and then go back on the fast and kind of repeat. So that does make a lot of sense to me as well.
All right, great. Thanks. So this is one of those things I just discovered by accident. I just ran sprints one day and I ate right away. And I was like, wow, this feels really good. So to me, I'm like, well, I'm going to try this again and see what it is. And then every time it feels awesome. And I just start to like imagine and think about our ancestors. And I love thinking about what's appropriate for our bodies. And you mentioned cardio not being really so great for the heart. And it really doesn't send a good stimulus to your body. And I often thought about the comparison of me running sprints to when I used to run 5Ks years ago, because I would train for the 5Ks. I do 5 mile runs or 3 mile runs, and it would not stimulate my appetite at all. But when I sprint now, I am sprinting like a madman, right? You mentioned on our show that if you see somebody from the waist up, you can tell if they're sprinting or not. If you saw me from the waist up, you're going to know I'm sprinting because I am upright. I pump my arms as hard as I can, and I am breathing as hard as I can the whole time. And it's for me, it's the next day. If I push myself properly, I get sore in areas that I wouldn't get. Like I'll get sore in my triceps and in my shoulders, but not the same areas or the same soreness I would get from doing a bench press or a military press or any kind of your tricep kickbacks, any of that stuff. I get sore in my tris and my shoulders like I've never felt before. And I get it in areas of my glutes and my hamstrings that I won't get from squats or deadlifts. And so it stimulates my appetite. So one of the things I love is, like I said, I'll sprint, I'll eat right away. And then my Thursday, I know I'm going to wake up with a ravish appetite and I'm going to be able to eat more that day. And that just shows the power of sprinting.
Yeah. Man, I love it. I wish more people would think about their fitness in that way, like thinking about not the amount of work that you're doing, but what signals you're sending to your body. And most people spend so much of their exercise time in just, it's been called like the black hole or junk miles or whatever, where they're huffing and puffing, and it's not a hard enough type of an effort to really stimulate growth or improvement in the body, but it's also way higher than where most people are optimizing their fat burning capacity. So I see it all the time with people around me that are either, at my community center or they're running around the lake. They run all the time. I've seen them daily for years, and their body shape does not change. And I don't know exactly what their goals are, but I would imagine most people, for all that work, they would like to see a better body composition. And these people look exactly the same. They might be slightly bigger or slightly smaller versions of themselves, but they look exactly the same for all this work that they're doing. And again, it's because they're working in a heart rate zone that is way too high to maximize fat burning and too low to send that signal. I wish more people would understand that compromise, or the kind of teeter totter between frequency and volume, and on the other side, like intensity. So if you're working out often, you're working out several days a week, your intensity is going to have to be very low to compensate for that. And that's where you just get into like, what are you doing? It seems like you're just wasting a bunch of time, versus like if you work out less frequently, well, now you get to have a really good intensity and send those signals to the body. So strength training with some intensity, doing some sprinting or sprinting like activities from time to time, and just not overdoing it and not doing it too much. You mentioned like once a week. I think that's more than enough. It's great. So I wish more people would think about that and really ask themselves, like, is this working? How long have I been trying to do this? Am I getting the results I'm seeking, or am I just working out? Like, am I getting a lot of workouts in and not seeing the expected results? So yeah, I think that's a big thing out there. So it's cool that you notice that as well.
I see people all day long up and down the bike path. And one of the things I've noticed since I started sprinting is that when I see somebody in a slow, steady state jog, most of the time they look miserable. It does not look fun. And I see some older, heavier people, and they're doing like that kind of half power walk, half jog thing. Sometimes they have weights in their hands too. That does not look like something I want to do. And it doesn't even look like something they want to do. It looks so miserable. We talked about the amount of time that you put in. Like when I'm doing my sprint workout, it may be a total of 45 minutes to an hour of a workout, but a lot of that is me doing warm up and things that I enjoy, like throwing slam balls around and resistance bands. Like I do a bunch of mobility stuff that has nothing to do with the sprinting. The sprinting itself is like 10 minutes. And I'm only doing usually 3 rounds. And the first round is like at 50%. Second round is like 70 to 80%. And that last one is going to be like 95% of my max. And I'll never push to 100 because that's like, to me, that's dangerous and that's overtraining. And that's the same mentality when you're bench pressing or whatever. You want to leave a rep in the tank. I always leave a rep in the tank, but I'm pushing myself 95% on that last sprint, and I'm leaving it all out there. And it's 10 minutes. And if I didn't want to do that whole elaborate warm up, I have days where I'm short on time, and it's 10 minutes. And if I push myself on that last one, I'm going to be sore the next day, and I'm going to be rewarded for it because it boosts my mood. It does so much for me.
Yeah. No, I love that. When we're done with this conversation, I'm going to be hosting an interview with Brad Kearns, who just wrote a book with Mark Sisson called Born to Walk. It's a kind of tongue-in-cheek, kind of a reference to the Born to Run book that came out by Christopher McDougall, I believe. And in Born to Walk, they make the argument of like we can run as humans. We can go out and run, 10K, 15K marathons, whatever, but that doesn't mean that it's really good for us to do all the time the way that most people do. And Mark Sisson, it kind of compares it to like a cold plunge where people say like, I really like cold plunging. Like, really, do you really like cold plunging? I don't know anybody who enjoys cold plunging. I know people who enjoy the benefit of cold plunging and they do it and get through it because the benefit is awesome. But is doing that itself where you get your enjoyment? Like, I don't think so. And he certainly doesn't as well. And so in the book, they try to just give people permission to say, like, look, if you don't enjoy chronic running, you don't need to do it. There's other ways, and it might be way more beneficial for you to be walking rather than, again, that chronic pounding running all the time in shoes that are inappropriate for proper running gait, as you well know. And so, yeah, again, it's just one of those things that I wish people would rethink. And it's also, this is so funny to me, but it creates a ton of resistance. So when I tell people in a free consult that they don't need to be strength training 5 days a week. They don't need to be running and training for 10Ks and half marathons all the time. It's almost like people don't want to hear it. Like when I tell somebody, like, you can strength train for like 20 or 30 minutes a week. That's all. I don't lift for more than 20 minutes a week. And you can have a really healthy, happy life doing that. It's almost like people don't want to hear it. They think they need to be doing all this stuff. When I tell a runner, like, if you really enjoy it and you don't care that your body composition isn't changing that much and you're chronically injured, but you love it and you love the social, like, that's fine. But when we can give you permission to not do that, if you don't love it, it's maybe not as beneficial as you think. People tend to kind of push back on it. When you would think this is like the best news somebody would ever hear, a lot of people don't want to hear it, ironically. So yeah, I wish most people would understand what you're explaining, which is like, saving your energy for one very difficult sprinting run a week and then going out and enjoying your life and enjoying your family is much more important, I think, to most people. If you and I stopped any of those people that are running around on those paths at any time and said, like, hey, what if you could run, way less and I could make you lose 15 pounds of body fat, I would hope that most people would be like, oh, that's I'd take that trade-off any day. But again, I think a lot of people push back on that notion.
Yeah, well, and what you're talking about there is the recovery factor, and this is something that I've incorporated into my training many, many years ago, and I share a lot of this stuff with Jim Wendler, who I've followed his 531 program forever. And when I was a power lifter, and there's just only so much time in the day for certain lifts, and you got to be able to recover. And he'll say that, well, you can't add something without taking something out. It's got to be a balance. And this is part of the reason I'm doing a Monday, Wednesday, Friday. I'd love to work out every day, but my body can't handle it. And as mental health is my priority, my brain can't handle it either because I'll overtrain and then I'll be irritable and angry. And then if I can't be a good dad because I'm snapping at my kid, well, then what's the point of working out every day? And this is another way that I look at what's appropriate for our bodies. So if we're living in a cave and we're sprinting and we get our prey and then we fill our bellies and then maybe we're sore the next day or the day after, we're probably full too. I don't think we're looking to sprint again unless we're running from a threat. We're not sprinting every single day. So I see people that are doing every day and they do sauna, they lift weights and they go in the cold plunge and they're doing it every day. How can your body handle that much stress? It's supposed to be hormesis. It's supposed to be just enough stress, right, to trigger a response. But to me, I need the recovery days and I enjoy them. Like I said, I'm eating more. Today's a Tuesday. I'll eating more. Activity is going to be relatively low. Long walk. I love walking. So I look forward to my recovery days. I'll go for a long walk. And the best thing is Um, it won't tank my mood. I'll still have good energy. And I'm working out 3 days a week. It's probably an hour per session. So you could say I'm working out 3 hours a week, but the weight training is maybe like the actual barbell lifts is like maybe 15 or 20 minutes of that on Monday and Friday. The sprints is only about 10 minutes on Wednesday. So like you said, 20 minutes a week, I'm doing a little bit more than that. And all the other stuff I'm doing is the mobility and the warm up. And I'm doing it because I enjoy it. And plus I have all this equipment down in the gym. I have kettlebells and dumbbells. One of the things I was doing during even before COVID was putting together a home gym. It's nothing elaborate, but I was buying and selling equipment. Like I said, we don't have a lot of money. So I found, you could buy weights at 25 cents a pound and sell them for $1 a pound. So I have a pretty nice gym. I have a Concept 2 rower. I've got a squat rack. I've got a full set of kettlebells and dumbbells and slam balls. And I made my own DIY exercise band bar with a board, kind of like the X3. Is that what it's called? The
Yeah, yeah,
X3
that's
bar?
right.
Yeah. So,
X3. Yeah.
so I have that. So, and I love all this stuff and I just like to use it. So like, I don't have to, but I did bent over rows yesterday. So I used the exercise band first. I'm doing a bunch of face pulls on a cable, just all this stuff that I love to do, but it's like 15 minutes of lifting. Maybe it's only 10 minutes. I'd have to time it. It might only be 10 minutes of actual barbell lifting because it's only a couple of sets I'm doing. And it's enough for me. And then I really look forward to my recovery days too. I'm going to go for a long walk when we get off. And I just feel like what I'm doing or what I try to do is what's most appropriate for our bodies. And it just seems to work the best for me.
Yeah, dude, I love that. At the end of the day, I wish most people again would understand what you last said, which is like I'm doing the best thing for me. Like the most important study in the world is an N of one where you are the N of one, when you're the experiment and you're paying attention to how you feel. No other randomized controlled trial or any study that anybody does is relevant to you unless it really works for you. So I wish people would understand that. And I don't know about you. I've wondered this. I want to get a straight answer about this. We must have either evolved in a time where there were just like way more predators around, or maybe even that notion of like we had to run away from stuff trying to kill us all the time. Maybe it is a little bit overblown. Like I live in the Salt Lake Valley, which, is a big city, but also in 40 minutes, I can drive to any place in the mountains. Within other hours, I can go down south to the Red Rocks kind of area. I've done backpacking trips in the middle of nowhere where literally you park and you walk into the hills and there's bears and all kinds of stuff. There's cougars and mountain lions, and there are predators around here. And for all the times I've gone camping and backpacking and, backcountry skiing and hiking and all this stuff, I have run from predators literally zero time in my life. And like around here, that's still like a top news story that happens once a year when a snowboarder comes across a cougar that chases him until he can book it down the mountain. That's like big time news around here. And so I wonder, even when we say like we were running around from predators, I wonder if even we have kind of overblown that a little bit. Like maybe it was that there were just lots of more predators than we have now. Or maybe we just don't need those inputs very often. Like, yeah, once a week, that's probably just fine. And you're paying attention to that recovery component, which you talked about, which is so important. I wish more people would understand. It doesn't take a lot. It's hard. It should be hard, but it's not. You don't need to rearrange your life and neglect your spouse and kids to be able to get the results you want. This should be something that enhances your life.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and part of the reason I'm only doing the sprinting once a week now is because I wanted to add the weightlifting back in. I was sprinting, that was my primary means of working out for like a year and a half, and it was 2, sometimes 3 times a week. But because I wanted to barbell lift again and I want to get a pull in and I want to get a push in, well, I can't sprint and do a pull and a push. I'm not doing that 3 times. It's too much. So, and what I liked, you said that I'm pragmatic, and I knew the word, but I had to look it up after we got off the show when you interviewed me. And I love that because it's exactly what I'm doing. I'm pragmatic about it. I'm doing what works for me at the current time, and it's really foregoing any common conception. There, like you said, with the calories in, the calories out. If I followed that, I would not be eating very much food, and I'd probably be wasting away. But if you look up a lot of these workout programs, like if I have an app for the 531 program, and they're all 3 to 4 days a week. I cannot lift that much. I just simply cannot do it. Even back in the day when I was at my strongest and I was doing the powerlifting, I didn't do Jim Wendler's program to a T. I've never done any program to a T. I've always adjusted it to make it work for me. I may start out trying it just to see, but I find out quickly that it's too much. I can't do it. So I got to dial it back and do what works for me. And like I said, I'm trying to fit all these other things in. So, and I don't have room to do a leg day or to do squats. So my sprint day is my squats. I'm doing a pull on Monday, my legs in a form of a sprint on Wednesday, and my push on Friday. And I put it that way on purpose because I've always prioritized the pulls because I feel like we have more muscles on our back, and I think we gain more strength by training those muscles. Plus, we do a ton of pressing in our lives anyway. So if I'm only going to do one or two workouts, it's going to be the pull and then a sprint, and the push can wait for another day. I've done so much bench pressing over the years. I don't need to do any more pressing. So I prioritize the pulling.
Yeah, that's a great way to look at it. And yeah, it is very pragmatic and practical. And yeah, if people understood like what you need is different than what you want. What you need to do fitness wise is probably less. It's not easy. Like I said, like it has to be challenging, but you don't need to do it that much. And then you can decide. Like I've got clients who they train 5 and 6 days a week and they like it and they go to the gym and it's a social environment and they understand that they don't need to, but they enjoy it. I thought I did until I realized like I actually don't like working out at all. If you told me I could work out this week or I could have an extra game of ice hockey, I would at 1,000 times out of 1,000 choose ice hockey. Like I like to play ice hockey. I like to paddleboard. I like to ride my bike. Like I would do any of those things other than working out. I work out because it's important. It makes me strong for those kinds of things. But like most people probably don't like doing the things that they think they need to do to be healthy anyway. And I think breaking it down like you did, you have a program that you enjoy that makes sense in your life, and you're capitalizing on the things that you're benefiting from, and the rest you're doing what you enjoy and spending time with your family. That's I think a way bigger priority. So I like that a lot.
And the best thing you said there is that I'm enjoying it because, like, what's the point if you're not going to enjoy it?
What's the
You know,
point?
I want to be fit. I want to be strong. My goal is to get in the best shape of my life, but I'm not going to do things that I don't enjoy. And as the weather gets warmer, I will start adding in activities. Like I'm a huge kayaker, and I have a creek nearby, and I will go do these power runs where it's like if I go fast, it's like a 20-minute paddle, but it's the same stretch of the creek that we'll go out with the family and we'll spend like 3 hours out there and we'll take our time. But I'm going to power through it. So speaking of not adding something in without taking something out, so what I'll do is when the weather gets nicer, I probably won't do my pull that week. I'll probably try to kayak on the Monday, and that'll be my pull. That'll be my back exercise, and I might do my warm up and then go do that. But I'm doing that because I love it. It's one of my favorite activities.
Yep. Yeah, that's very, very well said. I really like that. As a trainer, and you know what it's like. You've talked to so many people over the years who have done this. You work with people who have specific goals, right? Most of us want to be fit and healthy. Other people have time sensitive goals, like they're doing an Ironman or a marathon, or they're training for a bodybuilding competition. And for all the times, and even me, like I think back in my past of like the times that I won bike races when I was competitive in bike racing, and it's like you train so hard for this one thing, and even with success, with winning a competition, like, do you think any bodybuilder is one iota happier the next day after they win a competition? They're not. They're just not. I never was happy the day after winning a bike race. It was the only thing that you would train for. And, win or lose, like the next day, you're not any happier. We have to realize that, yeah, we want to be strong. We want to be fit, and you're going to die. Like, you're not going to live forever. You have to enjoy life and fit the things that you love and your loved ones and friends and family and hobbies and all that stuff in with your life, because it's just a short time that we're here. And thinking that looking a certain way, having a certain aesthetic, not that that's a bad goal. I think that's a great goal, but dedicating your entire life to that, it's not going to make you happier if you're not, dealing with yourself. I think about you and your story with meditation and understanding, where your ego is coming from and letting go of certain things. You're not going to be happier having accomplished all those things. You're going to be more depressed when you don't win the next time, or somebody in a judging competition doesn't judge you as highly as they did the guy next to you. So it's just, yeah, I think it's important to keep that in perspective.
All right, sounds good. Thank you. All right, so I want to shift gears here a little bit and ask you some questions about your own diet. This is what I ask all my guests. So, like, I want to know: was there a point where you weren't keto and then you went keto? I know you did. You did carnivore month. I saw you posting that. So, I want to know what your diet was like prior to that, and then how you changed it, and then I'd also like you to take us through maybe a typical day of eating for you.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. It's sometimes weird. I have to like be reminded of what my diet used to be. I just saw on my my Facebook time hop thing maybe 12 years ago all the meal prepping that I was doing and the giant salad I had on the counter, and it was divided into the different days, and like all the snacks of yogurt and berries and stuff that I needed between clients. And of course, in the fitness industry, even I wasn't certified as a nutrition coach until 2017, but I had been a trainer for a decade at that point anyway. And we're always talking about nutrition, and everybody knows what you need to do to have good nutrition. You need lean protein, you need whole grains, you need to eat frequently, small meals, have your healthy snacks, fruits and vegetables, and all that stuff. And it was a very, I'm a slow learner, Stephen. Like I don't pick up on things very easily. We had at the time learned that you could change the diet of an endurance athlete, for example, and start feeding them more fat, and then they would start burning more fat when they were doing endurance events, which is really important because your body only stores just a tiny amount of carbohydrates. Whereas we were saying earlier, the body can also store tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of calories from fat. And so by shifting an endurance athlete to a fat-based diet, they would be using a fuel source that they wouldn't run out of. So where I had to eat every, 10, 15 minutes on a bike ride, now I could go out completely fasted and do 3 hours and not run out of energy because my body's burning fat. So I learned that eventually. Somebody gave me an interview that Nina Teicholz did on the radio about the big fat surprise. I think I had an internal resistance to the idea because I knew about her work and I knew about this interview and listened to it and really enjoyed it in 2014, but I didn't read her book until 2016. And so I must have had the thought of like, if this woman is right about fat, being good for us and healthy for us, then everything else that I've learned is wrong. And I think I did resist that quite a bit. I got certified in 2017, which just further reinforced the idea that, you need lots of vegetables and lean proteins and all that stuff, the whole grains and how to portion them out and all that stuff. And it wasn't until like the following year that we were doing weight loss contests, and we had somebody who did a weight loss contest with us and said they lost several pounds in a few days doing keto. And what's this keto stuff? And I didn't know that much about it, which sent me down this rabbit hole that I've been in for, nearly 8 years at this point, 7, 8 years. And yeah, you started to learn that you actually didn't need any of the carbohydrates or a lot less. And so that is what kind of sent me down my own ketogenic diet, again, kind of changing that around 2017, 2018 timeframe. Got tremendous results where, again, I was blaming a lot of my clients for not following the advice we were giving them. Now it was like people were getting effortless results and they weren't hungry and all that stuff. And if you've been in the low carbohydrate space long enough, you'll come across a subset of people who are not eating any carbohydrates and they're eating a completely animal based diet. And so it must have been that summer that I was listening to an episode of Joe Rogan, who hosted a doctor who was in his 50s and was crushing deadlift competitions and rowing competitions. And this doctor, really smart doctor, was doing this really stupid thing where he was only eating ribeyes, and it was nuts. I'd never heard anything like that. And I got to the point in the interview when he said that he was distrustful of blood work because it didn't apply to the context of the type of diet that he was doing. And he made the argument that like how you feel today should be the best indicator of your health, not necessarily blood work numbers. I thought it was so ridiculous. I turned the episode off at that point. You're laughing. Of course, you know that this is Dr. Sean Baker, who,
Oh yeah.
again, I bumped into this weekend. I've trained in, being a carnivore coach through his program at this point, but I didn't even listen to the full episode where I learned about the carnivore diet. I think last year was the first time I went back and like, I should listen to that whole episode now that I basically have worked for him in his company. But anyway, yeah, I started to learn about people on the carnivore diet and followed, Dr. Baker and Dr. Paul Saladino at the time. His book, The Carnivore Code, was very influential in my training. And in April of 2019, I decided to try my, kind of carnivore experiment. I was just meat and vegetables at the time. And I found it so interesting that just the removal of something so healthy as vegetables would really make that big of a difference. But I wanted to try it for 30 days. I was convinced that I probably wouldn't die in that time. And, you mentioned the mental health. I don't know what I was expecting in the time that I switched over to carnivore. Certainly, I could control my body fat and my body composition was good. My energy was really good, but it was about 2 weeks in, 10 days to 14 days in, when something very stressful happened. Somebody wanted a refund for all the sessions that they had purchased, which directly impact my, my paycheck. And I just like responded in this way that I'd never responded in the past, where I was like completely relaxed about it and said, yeah, like, let's get you that refund. Let me know if you need anything in the future. And I just sat there and I'm like, well, wait a second. Like, why why would this have ruined my day or ruined my week before? And like, it was fine. I didn't understand like why it was fine. And I have not had any type of mental health diagnoses. Definitely haven't gone through the same level of struggle that you have. But I did realize when I cut it out, in hindsight, I was spinning in anxiety all the time, just like worrying about stuff that was never going to happen to me. And on this really weird, unconventional diet, that kind of dropped out to this day. Like, things happen in your day and you just like, oh yep, this happened, so I'll just do this other thing. Like, you can problem solve so much easier. You don't let life impact you the same way. And I thought it was so curious that by the time April of 2019 ended, I didn't really want to change. It was very easy for me. I felt great, and my mental health was so much better. Things were just beautiful and peaceful, and it was just awesome. And so yeah, I noticed that benefit to this day. And so it's coming up on 6 years of my carniversary, and little things here and there have crept in. I like the definition of a carnivore, as a carnivore in nature, where a hyper carnivore in nature consumes at least 75% of their calories from animal products. I like to think of it that way to just be a little bit more open and friendly for people who do have plant foods that make it work. I think most of us in this space understand that if they're not eating a vast majority of the calories from meat, especially red meat, they don't feel quite as good. And I don't love when people get caught up in the minutia of, did you have a slice of avocado, or did you have an onion with your burger or whatever. Like, the point is, you're running on fat, you're using fat as fuel. So yeah, typical day of eating for me, I will typically, just kind of depending on the day and my busyness, I will either eat once or twice a day. I find that to be very easy. I told you that I grew up in the Mormon church, and every month they do a fast. It's the first Sunday of the month. And I've told this story before where it's like, it's the most miserable day of the month to do it that one day. And then immediately after that day, you're just worried about the next time that you have to do it and how miserable it's going to be the next time. And like, once you are eating the certain way, like you are eating once a day, it's not hard. It's really easy. It's way more convenient. It's way more, inexpensive and easy to do. So yeah, if I have the time and I've prepared, I will normally eat anywhere from like 6 to 10 hard boiled eggs sometime around lunch. Again, just depending on, when I have them. I just got back from that conference and I have not prepared any eggs. I took 2 dozen eggs down with me and ate them all. And so like today, whether I wanted to or not, I don't have that food prepared since I just got back into town. And so I'm fasting. I'm going to be fasting until 6 or 7 when I eat. At night, I will typically have a steak. Either, if I'm wanting something a little fattier, I'll have a ribeye. If not, I'll have a New York. Sometimes I do ground beef. Sometimes I do other things like a bit of chicken or a bit of pork, although I see those more as like the condiments to the red meat. Which again, steak every single night sounds like it's expensive, but I do my shopping at Sam's Club, and their meat is awesome. It is very tasty. I've never had a bad steak, bad ground beef from there. It's absolutely delicious. I think the quality is super high, and it's like $10 a pound. And if that's expensive, I can always do like a chuck roast and cook a chuck roast in the crock pot with a bit of broth, and that's even less expensive. So that's typically what I do. I know for myself that regardless of whether I get my lunch meal or not, which is maybe like 3 or 4 days a week, I get it 3 or 4 days a week. I just don't, and I just fast all day. I can really only eat about 1.5 pounds of red meat at a time. That's kind of my limit. And so it's not the rule, but I use it as a reference. Like, I've got a gram scale and I'll just throw like uncooked steaks on there. And when I get up to about 1.5 pounds, I know that's about as much as I'm going to be able to eat. And I just go with whatever sounds good that day. Again, maybe a little leaner would be more protein, would be like a New York steak or a sirloin. If I wanted a little bit more fat, I'm not up to the same level of fat that you need for, what you're dealing with and what you're doing. But if I want something fattier, I'll choose chuck or I'll choose a ribeye. And I just, eat my set amount. I'm quite happy on it. I feel very energetic and full. And so that's kind of a day in life for me now.
That's great, man. Thanks for sharing all that. So there's a lot for me to respond to there. So you started your carnivore journey April 2019. That's when I initially lowered my carbs to lose weight. It was like March or April of 2019. So that's what started my whole journey into this whole thing too, was around the same time. I think that's
It's
very
cool.
cool. I love the message you're talking about with the sense of calm that you had and handling things that life throws at you. So I've had a couple guests on that were not mental health victims, and they will say the same thing, that they thought they were fine. And then they went low carb, and then maybe they went even carnivore after that. And they're reporting that, well, they realized that their wheels were spinning a lot, and they did have a lot of anxiety, and they had a lot of stuff going on. And they didn't even notice it until they went carnivore. And there's some big changes then. And it's something that I wish that everybody could experience. Like if you could dispense it as a pill bottle, like I want to just give this to my parents and give this to people I know and let them feel what it feels like. If they could just feel it for 5 minutes, it would be like, Stephen T is not crazy. Now I see why he does this weird diet that he does. People would understand. I wish there was something we could do to get people to do that. And the one thing you mentioned about how I'm eating every day, once every day or whatever, it's not something that I woke up one day and I saw this thing called OMAD on the internet. I'm going to try this OMAD thing. I just I was pragmatic and I followed my body. And in the beginning, I was doing the conventional thing, 6 meals a day. I've always been a lean guy, always trying to put on weight, especially when I was powerlifting and I'm eating 6 times a day. But right away, when I lowered my carbs back in 2019, I just wasn't as hungry. And I went to 2 times a day. I did that for a while. And then eventually, I just didn't need to eat twice. And I was doing OMAD long before I knew it was something that actually existed on the internet. I didn't know what OMAD was. I never heard of it.
No, I to your first point, I agree. I wish people could experience that. I'll give you an example. Like here in the Salt Lake Valley, here in Utah, we live in a giant bowl. Like we're kind of surrounded by mountains. And one thing that happens in the wintertime is if we get a stretch of cold weather, it's called an inversion, where the cold air gets trapped in the valley and doesn't cycle out. And so within a day, 2 days, 3 days, all of a sudden the pollution can get quite high. It's not unheard of in the wintertime, depending on when this is happening. We'll have some of the worst air quality on the planet, like next to some of the cities in like China or India. Like it can get quite bad around here, and there might not be a cloud in the sky, and it seems clear, and it seems like it's a bluebird day, and then you go drive up in the mountains and you rise above it, and you realize like, oh wow, I thought it was really clear, and yeah, there's no clouds, but we're marinating in all of our pollution and flatulence or whatever from everybody eating too much fiber or whatever, and you don't see it, you don't even notice it until you get above it. And I think that's the way a carnivore diet works, is you might not think you're dealing with anxiety or depression or whatever, but once you remove it, you see what the alternate could be, and like, oh yeah, I did have anxiety. So that's the to address that kind of first part. And remind me, what was the second part of the question?
I was just talking about the sense of calm that you had and wishing everybody could experience in it, and how naturally I gravitated towards eating 1 meal a day.
Yeah. Well, in my opinion, thanks for reminding me. And in my opinion, you did it the proper way, where it's not like I'm setting out to eat 1 time a day. It's that you start eating foods that are very satiating, excuse me, and you become satiated, which is different than feeling full. Like most people, when they say they're eating healthy, they are eating things like a salad with a bit of chicken and maybe some light dressing, and you will fill your stomach, and it will be full of fiber, and it will be full of low fat, low protein kind of stuff. And eventually, if you have that for lunch, you're going to stop eating and you'll think you're full. But then 2 or 3 hours later, like, go ahead and try to fast. Like, you're not wanting to fast. You are starving and you're craving whatever energy source you can get right now. Everybody heads to the break room and gets their donuts and coffee. Around here in the Salt Lake Valley, it's very popular. These soda stores that will sell you a bucket of soda with all kinds of like pumped in additives, like sugar, syrups, whatever, and they serve them with cake pops or cookies. It's one of the documentaries, like the Housewives of Salt Lake City, I think recently made this popular. They're called like dirty sodas. Dude, they're like on every street corner around here. And literally, if you Google when they're busiest, it's like between meals. They're always busy at 3 p.m. They're always busy at 8 p.m. And it's like, why presumably people have eaten a meal 2 or 3 hours before, why are they starting for sugar? And these lines wrapping around the buildings of people waiting to get their soda fix for the day. And it's because they're eating the foods that are making them full but not satiated. So you did it in the right order, in my opinion, where you start eating a carnivore diet, you eat until you're fully satiated. You're just uninterested in food. You don't really care, and you can go a long time. Not like you're trying to eat OMAD. You just naturally did it and then learn later that it was a thing. So I like the order that you did it in. I wish more people would approach it in that way.
Thank you. Did you say a bucket of soda?
I mean,
A bucket of soda?
they're pretty big. I mean, 32 ounces, 44 ounces. Yeah, it's a lot,
That's a
and
bucket.
like literally, it's not just a Coke. You'll get like cherry and lime syrups like pumped in to it. I know it doesn't sound appealing to me, obviously, but it's appealing to everybody around here. And
Okay.
with the predominant religion telling people they can't drink and smoke, people need their fix of something else, and anybody can have as much sugar as they want. That's not a problem. But yeah, I wish people would understand what it feels like to feel completely satiated to the point that it's not a chore for them to eat less frequently during the day. It's actually quite easy and convenient, and you can go off and do other things and just not feel hunger. It's amazing.
Right. Yeah. And the comparison for me is now I'm eating high fat diet, one meal a day. And there are some days where I'm busy and I don't have a chance to eat. I'm just not all that hungry. And I just fast for the day and it's no big deal. I'll just eat the next day. But when I was a vegetarian and a vegan for 20 years, and I was even when I added meat back in, and I was doing a powerlifting diet and I'm eating 6 meals a day, I'd be out mowing the lawn and my sugar would drop and I would get shaky and sweaty and I'd have to come in and like pound a bunch of granola or find whatever sweets I could find in the house. And I was always eating 6 meals a day and frequently as soon as I wake up, every couple of hours, right before I go to bed. That's the contrast for me. And the amount of stomach distress I had and the amount of pooping that I did, all of that is like, and that's why I've gravitated towards the raw diet now, is because all of those things are at such an optimal level. I don't deal with any of that stuff anymore.
Yeah, I love that, man. Again, through that self experimentation, you got to that particular state. Doing that and notice that you just felt so much better. And yeah, I wish more people would kind of play around with that and see what works for them. But literally understanding that protein and fat is the most nutrient dense combination that you can find that just eliminates that blood sugar curve, that roller coaster that most people are on all day, every single day. And if you are burning your own fat, you have a fuel source that's always there. Your energy is flat. It's not too high. It's not too low. It's just always set in there. There's just a sense of like calmness, regardless of what's, kind of going on around you. It's pretty nice.
Yeah, it's great. So I just noticed we're running a little bit short on time. As usual, I have all this stuff I wanted to ask, but I'm going to get to some of my most favorite ones here before we get into the closing. I want to know about your experience as a podcast host because you've interviewed so many experts, so many big people. Can you give us like your most valuable takeaway or one of the most prominent things you could think of that you've learned from hosting somebody?
Oh man, that's such a great question. It's, as you know, when you start to do interviews with people and hit record, it's just such a joy to create conversations like you and I sitting here right now. We've been talking for an hour and 40 minutes and we are just like making noises with our mouth that's now recorded and can hopefully help somebody out there. And, I thought in the beginning, the best part about podcasting would be, eventually as we grew and you start to interview the people that are huge and amazing in our field. And it's a huge honor. Like I got to see Nina Teicholz again this weekend, and give her a huge hug and tell her how influential she is in my life. And I've hosted her 3 or 4 times, and I've choked up twice introducing her on the show because she's a hero of mine and changed my life completely. And those are very meaningful. Interviewing Dr. Georgia Ede, Dr. Palmer, like all these people, it's a huge honor, and I try not to take that for granted. I also, at the same time, love finding unique people and unique stories who are maybe not changing the world in a sense, but they're doing amazing work, and maybe they haven't been discovered or aren't doing a ton, but they're trying and they're doing really great work. And I love, just as much as I love interviewing somebody like Nina Teicholz, I love interviewing people who are just in our space. And one example I'll give, who I mentioned at this conference, I ran into Ken Berry and wanted him to do a quick video. This video was for an entire family that I met on a carnivore page on Facebook. They posted a picture of themselves. Family is not super healthy, they're going through a health journey. Becky was the name of the woman who posted and just said, hey, like, my family and I are sick of poor health and we're starting a carnivore diet. Does anybody have any tips and tricks? And I reached out and, as always, just offer like, hey, you can always do a free session if you've ever got questions. But I'm talking with this woman and she's just starting a carnivore diet. And so I reached out to her and I said, would you maybe, you or your family, like to be on a podcast and tell us like what it's like? Like I'm interviewing people who are at the, seemingly the end of their carnivore journey. You're at the very beginning. What do you think? Do you think this is going to work out for you? Are you optimistic? Like, so I got to interview her and chat with her about the very beginning of her carnivore journey. And she's, nobody in the space and has just started a YouTube channel and is trying to get her message out there. But I get just as much joy and still get nervous for those interviews just as much as I do some of the people in our space. And so things that I've learned, like, of course, every, podcast I do, I listen back to and I learn facts and learn stuff and get different perspective. The thing I've learned the most is probably to be a bit of a better listener. I use the mute button on myself a lot, as much as I can, and try to allow my guests to talk and share their stories and try not to do the thing that I tend to do, where I'm thinking about the next question I'm going to be asking rather than truly listening. And that carries over into all walks of life, and trying to be mindful of that when I'm, having conversations with my wife or my clients or that kind of thing. So if you're asking me like a macro, what thing have I learned? It's to be a better listener.
That's amazing because I know exactly what you're talking about, and it's something that I work on too. And I've got my notes in front of me, and I've got you in front of me, and I'm listening. And then there are times where I'm like, okay, what's gonna be coming up next? I do want to have a good flow to the show. I do want to make sure I get all the stuff that's important to me in. It is a challenge at times to stay focused and just to listen. And then sometimes you'll give a long answer. You might give a 5-minute answer, and there was something important you said in the beginning. By the time you're done, like, I don't even remember. There's something I wanted to mention or talk about. I'm like, whatever, I don't care. In the beginning, my shows were shorter. Some of my shows were shorter, and I was mindful of not talking too much. But since I'm typically going 2 hours with people, and me and my guests, we enjoy the back and forth so much, and the audience seems to really love it too. They love how I interact with people, and then I can share my own knowledge. And so there are times when I listen back, I'm like, oh man, I talked way too much in that show. Nobody wants to listen to a bald, boring dude talk that much. They're here for the guest.
Well, no, I mean, you do a great job hosting. I was just listening to your episode with Eric Rogers, who I also got to see this weekend, and it's a nice conversation. You do a really good job flowing with that, and I think people appreciate that and appreciate the longer form. I mean, even just in this conversation, we've talked about things I've never talked about before on a podcast. So again, to you, that's being a really, really good host and giving people the space to talk. So yeah, I love that.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for that positive feedback, because that's what I want. That's been my vision from the very beginning, is that I don't want to just be another podcast. Like, you can see you tell your story on some other show or whatever. That's not doing anything really. I wanted it to be different, and I'm excited for my interview with Georgia to come out next week. It comes out the same day that you're putting out my interview on your show, the 21st.
Awesome.
'Cause it's unlike anything I've heard her do before. She talks about her childhood. She talks about her diet. I ask her, what about special occasions? Like, do you indulge? And she talks about what kind of treats she might have and how she navigates. Like, you see the person. You see how she's navigating her own diet. It's very, very interesting. I'm excited for that one to come out.
I was already looking forward to listening, and now I'm looking forward to it even more because I'd never heard her address that kind of thing either. And I think that just speaks volumes to the kind of host that you are, to go that little bit deeper.
Oh,
It definitely
thanks. I
shows up.
appreciate
It's
that.
great.
It's going to be great for the audience to hear that the way Georgia explains, people may put her on a pedestal because we feel like she's a celebrity or whatever, but she's just like everyone else, and she's trying to navigate the valleys of life, and you'll get to hear how she does it.
I can't wait. Oh man, that's going to be awesome. I can't wait.
All right, so I was wondering, since you interviewed me, have you had any thoughts or consideration of trying raw meat or maybe a high fat beef only approach?
Oh man, I love this question. Absolutely love this question. Um, short answer, no. Short answer, no. Um, I don't know if I would have the taste for it, and I like hearing your story of, like, you were cooking initially things like really well done, and then you started cooking less and less to the point that you stopped cooking altogether, and you thought the taste was way better. I still really enjoy the taste of cooked meat at this point. However, I will say that it helped me rethink um, the food kind of safety around the cooking of meat. So, for example, one night at this conference, obviously away from home, we had to go out. I normally eat at home, but we had to go out, and we went to a Korean barbecue one night. And yeah, it's a lot of, all you can eat meat, and you cook it yourself. And I was cooking it far less than I normally would have. I normally keep my stuff, rare to medium rare, but like, having that in the back of my head of like, oh, I don't need to make sure that this is completely cooked all the way through. I can just hit it on either side and it will be, fine. So that, I mean, that has definitely changed since our conversation. As far as the fat goes, I don't necessarily, I'm not, I do, my mental health is better when I'm on a carnivore diet. I am not treating a disease in the way that people that have found, metabolic psychiatry have and need to have a high fat diet. As you and I know, like a metabolic ketogenic therapy is vastly different than, the keto diet or carnivore or whatever. You have to be mindful of the fat you eat. And I feel quite confident that I'm getting a decent amount of fat and protein in my diet. And so I don't necessarily have a different goal there, but you have, I have to say, you've helped me change my thinking around it and remember that, oh yeah, like we have, stomach acids, if it's working properly, that's more like a scavenger, even more so than like a carnivore. And you can handle raw meat and meat that is quote unquote bad. Like you should be able to digest all that stuff just fine. That's what we're set up for. So I've been more lax on it. I don't know that I'll get to the point of doing raw, but I found it really interesting. And I told you on the show, I don't think we'd ever covered that topic on the podcast. And so I really appreciated your insight into that. And as you pointed out, and as we've just mentioned, like the number one thing you probably get from everybody is food safety and understanding that, it's, we've got expiration dates on certain things and we have cooking temperatures for certain things, but is that really necessary all the time? Maybe not.
Oh, this is so cool. Here I am interviewing my idol, and I've had an influence on him in his life.
Uh,
It's so cool.
definitely have. Yeah, you definitely have. Yeah.
Oh man, this is great. I love it. All right, I want to get into our closing because we're running out of time here. So I have two questions that are posed to your younger self. And they're similar, but the first one's going to be related to diet and usually mental health, but physical health for you. And it's going to be how to get yourself through the tough times. So I want to know, what is a piece of advice you'd give to your younger self before you discovered diet and something that would have gotten you through the tough times?
Is the first question related to the diet?
Yes, because the second question is just going to be a general piece of
General.
advice
Perfect.
that's not related to diet at all.
Wanted to make sure I understand that. I mean, so obviously, I wish I would have known as a kid. You and I talked about this on our show. I wish I would have known about, fat and protein, regardless of whether I would have done a carnivore diet or not. I wish I would have known that fat and protein are the two combinations of essential nutrients that we need. And I wish I would have made that my focus. Everything, growing up was low fat, no fat. Sugar was just fine. And you know what? I had acne and I was hungry and I fell asleep in my first period and the period after lunch pretty much every single day in high school. And yeah, I wanted to be good at ice hockey and I wanted to be good at football. And like, you're drinking and eating sugar nonstop. And like, yeah, I wonder if I would have gone back and said like, hey, your performance will be better. Your acne will go away. You'll be able to build more muscle and look better. If I wouldn't have been a lot more willing to do that type of a diet in the beginning. Obviously, that information wasn't out there, and we were doing the best we could at the time. I told you about my mom, especially seeing the way her cancer treatments were going on a high carbohydrate, low fat diet was not great. She suffered quite a bit before she passed away, 7.5 years after her diagnoses. And I was even just thinking about this weekend. She died at 46 years old, dude. 46, diagnosed in her late 30s and had treatment after treatment after treatment. They couldn't even do radiation on her anymore because she'd already had like the lifetime limited amount. And she was off of planet Earth because of cancer in 2006 at age 46. And I just think like, man, if we would have known at the time that everything that we were told to be doing was like, throwing gas cans on the dumpster fire. It was like the worst thing. So yeah, that's the nutritional advice I would want anybody to know is, the way we thought about fat in the past is inaccurate. You need the fat, you need the protein. I wish I would have ate more of that. Again, regardless of whether I ended up deciding to do carnivore or not, like I did later in life. But I really wish I would have known that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to say that I'm sorry for what you went through, and I'm sorry for your loss with your mom. And I just turned 48, so thinking of her passing at 46, that's tragic.
It's wild. And all the, race for the cure 5Ks that we were doing, like, did that make one little iota bit of difference? Like, it's just so silly. And yeah, the opportunity there is now we know, and now we have platforms and we've got ways to share the message. And hopefully people out there are choosing something different that, literally would not have been on the table, back then 20, 30 years ago.
Exactly. That's why we're here today.
That's why we're here.
All right. So my second question is similar, but not related to diet or health. Just if you could go back in time and give yourself one piece of advice, what would it be?
Oh man. I love the question. I will use an example from two of my favorite humans on the planet, which is my grandparents. My grandpa is 93, grandma turned 88 this year. And on my grandma's 80th birthday, celebration, we took them out to dinner and I asked them the question, like, what age has been your favorite? Like, what's been the best age? Is it now? Like, did you like it better when you were in your 40s? And she just had this like really simple answer. that it's really stuck with me, where she just said, oh, like all of it, like as it was happening, it was just the best at that time. And I just like, I enjoyed the time as I was experiencing it. And now is really great. And it was great 10 years ago and it was great 20 years ago. And I look at my grandparents and they don't follow any particular diet. My grandma has reversed, type 2 diabetes and prediabetes by stopping her sugar consumption. She stopped buying candy and bringing candy in the house, and she reversed her diabetes just by that alone. And I just look at these two people, and they're not religious. Um, they're not Zen masters, but they kind of are, and they're just happy, and they laugh so hard almost on a daily basis that they end up crying. And that statement of like, all of it, all of your life was great when it was happening. And I think especially in all of our culture, but especially here in the Salt Lake Valley, there's like a checklist of things that you do and you have to do, especially as I'm growing up in this religion, is like, oh, you get baptized and you go on your mission, and then you go to college, and then you get married, and then you start pumping out kids, and like you're always focused on the next thing, and you're not really appreciating what's going on while it's there. And so I wish I would have taken more time to be more mindful and more present, and just enjoyed the things around me as they were happening. That podcast interview you did with Eric, where he mentioned the power of now. I think about that all the time, and some of the sentiments that he has in the book is like, there's never, like, ask yourself, like, what is wrong with this present moment? Is there a problem right now, or is the problem you're thinking about something you said yesterday, or an issue that you may or may not ever have in the future? And so, again, it's not like walking around like a Zen monk all the time, but it is understanding that this is a temporary time, that we're here. Nobody's going to remember you. You're not going to make this vast, massive, impact in the world. So where can you make an impact? Who can you smile at, and who can you share with? And how can you appreciate today and love the people around you? I wish I would have done more of that. And then also to say, like, I'm definitely not very good at that today. So remembering to try to do that on a daily basis, it would be something I would tell my younger self.
That's amazing. That was such a great answer. And you're talking about mindfulness and being present in the moment and the value of laughter and smiling. And what I love about these questions is I'm asking you to pose it to your younger self, but the answer you're giving is even appropriate for you today, because you need to remind yourself this is an adult, and everybody out there listening needs to hear the advice that you're giving. That was an excellent answer. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. And again, I just look at your own story and how meditation was such a big part of that. And that is a tool of mindfulness. And when you're eating a proper human diet, like, your meditation practice will be better, your mindfulness will be better. And I've certainly noticed that. I feel like a carnivore diet is a spiritual diet. And I do feel more spiritual when I'm eating in a certain way. So I think that's really important as well.
You should see how spiritual you can get when you go raw, high fat vegan.
Exactly. Exactly. Good point.
Here comes my signature question, right? This is a question that encourages you to share a broader, more philosophical insight or life lesson that ties into your experience with the ketogenic diet and provides something meaningful and potentially even new after our in depth interview. This is my fat fueled philosophy question. What is one powerful piece of fat fueled philosophy, a life lesson, or a mantra that you've embraced on your ketogenic journey and that you think could inspire our listeners?
Oh my goodness. Yeah, I don't pretend to inspire anybody, but I would say it's along the lines of the last question. When you're eating what I would now call a proper human diet, it allows you to have energy to walk through life, and to be present, and to appreciate things, and to have energy to do the things that you want to do. So understanding that fat fueling, burning fat as a fuel source, is our human birthright and is our normal and natural state. It is not a fad. The standard American diet is a fad. And when you go back to that state, it's just amazing to see everything that optimizes. And, it's not just you lose weight and you lose fat. Most people on this diet do stop caring about their weight loss and fat loss because their brains feel good, and they're reversing horrible diseases, and getting rid of medications that were causing tons of side effects, as you very well know. And so I would just want people to understand that fat is our proper fuel. It's what we have run on as a species for a very, very long time, and reintroducing that allows us to have I'll even insert the name in here, boundless amounts of energy. And so, yeah, I would want people to know that when you're eating the proper way, you get to experience life in the proper way as well. And there's just no comparison, man. I don't know anybody like you, like myself, who would ever go back to feeling the way that we did in the past. And achieving this level of health and happiness is just so wonderful. There's no way I would ever want to change that for anything. So that would be, I guess, my answer there.
That is incredible. I love that. I'm going to give you a round of applause. Hopefully it comes out. And it's not coming out, right? Yeah, of course. Right. So, hey, there it is.
Hey, there we go.
That was an awesome answer. The software I'm on, it like moderates the audio, and sometimes it dulls it down and you can't even hear it on the recording.
Oh, funny.
I love that you got your branding in there too. That was good.
Yeah. Good.
So you said you watched a little bit of Mia, a little bit of Eric. Have you seen any of my shows to the end? Do you see what I do at the end?
That's funny you mentioned that. I'm like 10 minutes away from finishing the episode that you have there.
All right. So I'm going to take my headphones off, so I won't be able to hear you, but I talk about my tenets in life, and it starts with the ketogenic diet and the fasting and then sunshine and body movement and all these things that I do, the grounding. One of my tenets in life is to have fun and enjoy life. Because after all, if we can't have fun and we can't enjoy life, what's the point, right? What's the point of life if we can't have fun? So I have my tagline for the show. My tagline is fix yourself with fat. All right. So this is my rapper persona. And I say it in my own unique way. I say, fix yourself with fat. And
I love it.
What I've been doing is I've been asking all of my guests to do the tagline for us. And then I'm putting a compilation together of everybody I've interviewed saying the tagline. So what do you think, Casey? Is that something you can do for us today?
I'm down. Absolutely. Do I need to change character as well?
If you got it, go for it. Yeah.
You know what? I don't have much around me, but I do have my favorite hat of my new favorite sports team, the Utah Hockey Club. We have an NHL team here in the Salt Lake Valley. It's absolutely wonderful. So I'm going to put my hat on backwards, my Utah Hockey Club hat, and say, fix yourself with fat, fool.
I love it. That was great. Thank you so much.
Hope that was good enough.
That was awesome. So I like to dream big. And when I started the podcast, I'm like, someday I'm going to host Chris Palmer and Georgia E. And I'm going to get them to say the tagline. And sure enough, I had George on a couple weeks ago. She did the tagline. Everybody's done it so far. And it's awesome.
That's great. I love that about Georgia E. Knowing her, of course, she did the tagline. That's great.
Oh, when I asked her, I said, is that something you can do? She said, oh, sure. That's easy.
Perfect.
She didn't know it was coming.
That's great. Oh, I love it.
I want to say a proper goodbye because I haven't done that on all my shows. That's a mistake. I'm going to say a proper goodbye. So Casey, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for coming on, for talking with me today, and for giving me so much of your time. Thank you.
Oh, of course. Thank you, Stephen. It was a joy to chat with you. You're a great host, and I've loved every minute. So thank you so very much.
Thank you.